Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw. Oh, look at that. Okay. So just to describe it for the listener. Okay, so it's a book cover. Wait. So it says Rogers Leslie PhD. So, sorry, Dr. Leslie. Sorry about that.
You can just call me Roger.
Nice. Okay, so the photo is a black and white photo of you seated at maybe a typewriter. Is that a typewriter? Something at your arm.
It is a typewriter, yes.
Okay, yeah, it looks kind of faded. It's a black and white portrait. Very handsome, very, very handsome. It says, "Light come out of the closet. Memoir of a gay soul." Roger Leslie. What am I looking at? This is your book. Nice.
That is my newest book. It just came out this year. So it is a memoir. And people have asked me, why would I want to write a memoir about a period in my life that happened so long ago? Because the book takes place from the time I'm about 11 till I'm about 16 or 17. And here's what happened, Ran. So for most of my life, my adult life, I haven't reflected too much on that part of my life because it was a very painful time. I grew up in a very strict Catholic environment and very loving parents, but very stern and not very emotional. And everything that I was learning about life and spirituality was following very strict rules. And I was a rule-following kid. I loved pleasing my parents. I loved making my teachers proud. So I focused all my energy on making them proud and pleasing them. But I've always known I was gay. So I had this terrible conflict because everything that I seemed to be noticing and learning from my family, from my religion, and from society told me that by being gay, that negated all the good stuff that I was doing in my life. And that was a terrible struggle for me because spirituality has always been important to me. So this book covers that journey of how I explored what the world was teaching me and how I came to terms with who I am as a spiritual man.
Okay. Boom, like all of these things. So first of all, thank you for sharing. Thank you for, I understand writing. I come from the world of writing. I know about writing books, all that kind of stuff. So I understand the process of sitting down, capturing that narrative. The fact that you have a PhD shows that you have, that's a very lonely road in a way when you're kind of doing your research and then having to actually capture it into your thesis, into your book. And then, so what is your PhD in?
It's in education.
Okay.
In addition to being a writer my entire life, I was a teacher and a school librarian. So my undergraduate work is my degree is in education. My master's degree is in creative writing. I have master's certification in library science, and then I got my PhD in education.
Wow. Respect. Okay. So creative writing, that's part of my bag of training as well. Yeah, so here it is. Like the thesis of the podcast is, how do we make every second count? How do we make meaning of our lives? And in your case, you write this memoir of, is it like, are you essentially trying to bridge, because I'm just going from what you've said, bridge the sort of your experience of, being rejected or feeling rejected, as far as the cues from religion, from society, from your family. I'm sure you're saying they're loving, strict, but loving. So is this memoir you just kind of going back to those experiences to kind of share and uplift? Like why did this book have to be written?
So the purpose of this book is to inspire and encourage people to follow their own spiritual path and to trust what their own spiritual path is. But what part of the reason I decided to write this book is, as I mentioned at the start of the description, I hadn't really thought back on that stage of my life so much because it was painful, and I associated a lot of pain with some negative things I learned in my childhood. But then it occurred to me a few years ago that there are probably hidden blessings in that struggle that helped me become who I am. And I probably would not have become who I am today had it not been for the strict moral upbringing that I grew up with.
Oh,
And
sure.
so I decided rather than just associate it with something painful, I wanted to go back and re-explore that stage of my life and find out what did that stage of my life provide me that gave me the strength to move into myself, to find my own spiritual path, and then to be an author who encourages and inspires other people to do the same.
Mm-hmm. Very well said. Very well said. Okay, so somebody who didn't grow up in Houston, didn't grow up in the U.S. So Houston's considered the South, or is it more like the South is like, when I think of the South, it tends to be like, Georgia and, all those kind of states. I kind of imagine Houston to be a little bit more cosmopolitan, a little bit more chill. Or would you say that growing up there, this notion of spirituality loomed very large in your life, like that out of necessity you said, okay, look, spirituality is such a big part of my life, I have to make sense of it, and how I'm going to make sense of it is not necessarily through this book, because you've been making sense of it all your life, right?
Right. So actually, I grew up in Michigan. I grew up in the Detroit area, and I lived in a very insulated Polish Catholic community. So there
Okay.
wasn't much diversity where I grew up, but part of this novel takes place in the stage where I moved at age 14 from the Detroit area to Houston with my family. And it really was a lifesaver. People have asked me over the years, you were 14 years old. Wasn't that just a horribly difficult transition to make? It is for most children. And really, for me, I do believe it saved my life because
Mm-hmm.
I had done such a poor job of making connections, making social connections my freshman year in high school, because at that point I was very clear that I was gay and I didn't want anybody to know because I didn't know what to do with that knowledge myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I
Mm-hmm.
isolated myself to the point where I was very lonely, I was very lost, and there were times that I was even suicidal.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately for me, already at that time, I knew I wanted to be an author. And I was able
Wow.
to filter a lot of those feelings into the characters that I was writing in the stories and screenplays that I was already working on. So I
Oh,
could
wow.
examine it a little bit vicariously by writing about it.
Hmm.
So then we moved to Texas, and that's where I learned diversity because I went from a Catholic high school, which was very small and very homogenous, to a large public high school in Houston, which was very diverse, lots of different ethnicities, lots of different backgrounds. And of course, this was 1976. So this was the influx of when Michigan and Texas flip-flopped as the largest state, most populous states.
Oh, I
I mean,
didn't know that.
Detroit and
Okay.
Houston flip-flopped the most populous cities. I think they went from 5 and 4, and then the year we moved, it seems like everybody from Detroit moved to Houston because it then was 4 and 5. So that
Got it.
Houston
Got it.
became more populous than Detroit. So
Hmm.
there was a great education in finding diversity, and it gave me hope that there might be more to the world than I had experienced. And I was eager to figure out where I fit because I didn't feel I fit in the world where I grew up.
But you're also a teenager, right? And a teenager, I mean, that whole what is your identity is going to happen to everyone, right? Like
Yes.
every kid's going to go through that. Like,
Yes.
and
But at the
and
time when I'm a teenager, I was under the assumption, as I believe many teenagers are, because I not only was one, but I taught them for many years. You
hmm
know, teenagers with their limited level of experience, when they feel something, they often think, oh my gosh, I'm the only person in the world who's
right.
thinking this. I'm the
Yep.
only person who's feeling this. Nobody understands me and nobody can understand me. And of course, I wasn't willing to take risks and share with other
hmm
people what I was going through because I didn't understand it myself, that it just further isolated me. I think with technology now and social media, I think maybe teenagers might have more exposure to more diversity, which I think
Oh,
is
for
a
sure.
wonderful thing. But where I grew up, There were 3 channels for television. There weren't any positive images of gay people anywhere, if there were images at all.
Yep.
And I didn't know any in my family. I really thought I was the only person in the world who felt the way I did. And plus, I perceived myself as a relatively masculine man. And so when there were stereotypes on television, like Liberace or somebody, I thought, well, I don't think I'm like him, and I'm not attracted to somebody like him. So maybe I don't even fit with gay people. I just had no idea.
Right. Light come out of the closet. Okay. So, but it's a proper memoir. So it's a proper, like, sort of revisiting. And so okay. So one of the best books about writing that I've come across is by Hélène Cixous. And she talks about what is it to be a writer, right? Really kind of very philosophical about it. And she talks about Franz Kafka and all these people in terms of the bravery of sitting in your room and really going into, like, diving into the territory of yourself that is scary and that is uncertain. But this book is you going back to that time. Now, to somebody who's listening, who's going through their own, like, turbulence or whatever. So why don't you talk about how writing relieved that? You said you could sort of live vicariously. Is that my dog or is that your dog?
I'm afraid that's at my house. I've got somebody to take care of him. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. Listen, I've got 5, so don't worry about it. But yeah, so going back to the question that I almost forgot is, what is it that you like when you live vicariously through because you're working through your ideas and your emotions and whatever. So in writing this book, are you just reporting on the work that you did back then? Or what is the new territory you kind of discovered while creating this book?
That's a great question, Ran. So I had to face the demons that I was avoiding for all these decades, because I had to go back and take an honest look at what it was that I was avoiding that hurt so bad back then, and determine where the accountability on my part was in how I co-created a really bad situation because of how I interpreted things, because of how I perceived things. I love what you shared about the author and Kafka and so forth, because in addition to being an author, I am a writing coach, an editor, and a publisher. And I often tell people, my clients, or when I speak in large groups, that in the first draft, you have to bare your soul, because that's where the truth of the work really is.
Right.
I tell the people who are thinking of writing or who are writing, in that first draft, go as deeply as you can, go where you're afraid to go. And then ultimately, even before you share the work with your editor, you can always go back and look at it. And if it's too personal, if it's too painful, if it's too much, you can always take it out and never show anybody, because that first draft is just for you. But you must bare your soul, and you must go where you're afraid to go, because what seems the scariest is really the most alive. And that's what readers are going to connect with.
Wow, you are an educator. I love it. Roger Leslie, Light Come Out of the Closet. Unfortunately, we don't have, the show unfolds very quickly. So I think we should go on to the next photo.
Perfect.
So is life really a gift? Really? Can you make every second count? That's the whole point of the podcast. So if you like what you've seen and you're inspired, because that really is my mission, then please give it a like, subscribe, and share.
Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting.